On a warm summer morning in 1952, people across Washington, D.C. looked up and saw something they couldn't explain. It wasn't just one person. Air traffic controllers watched strange blips appear on their radar screens. Pilots reported brilliant lights moving at impossible speeds. Military personnel tracked the same objects. Then, as Air Force fighter jets raced into the night sky to intercept them, the mysterious targets simply vanished. Minutes later, they appeared again somewhere else. If you're listening as you drift toward sleep, picture that peaceful sky above you. Let your breathing slow and let the story carry you gently into the years when one unexpected sighting would change everything. For several weekends, America's capital became the center of a mystery that newspapers around the world could not stop talking about. Imagine living in that moment. The Cold War had only just begun. The Soviet Union had exploded its first atomic bomb. Both superpowers were building weapons capable of ending civilization. Every unidentified aircraft was treated as a possible threat. Every unexplained radar contact raised terrifying questions. Was America being watched? Was a secret enemy technology flying over the nation's capital? Or was something even stranger unfolding? Today, stories about UFOs often drift into the world of internet rumors, conspiracy theories, and science fiction. But there was a time when the United States government took these reports seriously enough to create an official program dedicated to investigating them. It was called Project Blue Book. For nearly 2 decades, from 1952 until 1969, the United States Air Force collected more than 12,000 reports of unidentified flying objects. The people making these reports were not only curious civilians. They included military pilots trained to recognize aircraft, commercial airline crews responsible for hundreds of passengers, police officers, radar operators, scientists, engineers, and even astronauts. Most cases eventually received ordinary explanations: bright planets, weather balloons, unusual cloud formations, classified military aircraft, optical illusions, and simple mistakes accounted for thousands of sightings. But not all of them. Hundreds of cases resisted explanation, even after careful investigation. Some involved multiple eyewitnesses who had never met one another. Others were confirmed by radar. A few unfolded over military bases where observers were trained to notice even the smallest detail. These incidents left behind thick case files filled with photographs, interviews, diagrams, and unanswered questions. Yet, Project Blue Book was never just about mysterious lights in the sky. It was a product of its time, a time when fear shaped national policy, when secrecy became a way of life, and when technological breakthroughs were happening so quickly that yesterday's impossible invention could become tomorrow's classified military project. The same government investigating reports of flying saucers was secretly testing aircraft that flew higher and faster than anything the public knew existed. Sometimes the investigators themselves didn't know what they were looking at because the truth was hidden behind layers of national security. That raises an uncomfortable question. Was Project Blue Book genuinely searching for answers, or was it trying to reassure an anxious public while protecting America's most closely guarded secrets? The deeper you explore the story, the more complicated it becomes. This is not simply a story about aliens. It is a story about human curiosity confronting the unknown. It is about scientists forced to question their assumptions. Military officers balancing public transparency with national security, journalists racing to report astonishing claims, and ordinary Americans who found themselves at the center of events that would change their lives forever. Along the way, we'll travel from quiet mountain skies in the Pacific Northwest to bustling radar rooms in Washington. From hidden Air Force offices in Ohio to remote military test ranges deep in the Nevada desert. We'll meet skeptical astronomers, determined investigators, frightened witnesses, ambitious generals, and people whose experiences would continue to haunt them decades later. And by the end, one mystery may become surprisingly clear. The biggest question surrounding Project Blue Book was never whether humanity was alone in the universe. It was why, in one of the most tense and secretive periods of American history, the world's most powerful government devoted nearly 20 years to chasing objects that, in many cases, it could never fully explain. Before the investigations, before the famous sightings, and before the words flying saucer became known around the world, America first had to learn to fear and wonder about what might be hiding in its skies. Long before Americans began talking about flying saucers, they had already developed a habit of looking upward with a mixture of hope, fear, and imagination. For thousands of years, the sky had been a place of mystery. It brought rain and drought, eclipses and comets, stars that guided explorers across oceans, and storms powerful enough to reshape entire civilizations. But by the end of the 19th century, something fundamental had changed. The heavens were no longer seen as a realm beyond human reach. They were becoming a place that humanity believed it could conquer. That shift would set the stage for one of the strangest chapters in American history. In the late 1800s, the United States was transforming at a breathtaking pace. Railroads stitched together a continent. Telegraph wires carried messages faster than horses could run. Factories poured out machines that would have seemed miraculous only a generation earlier. Every few years, another invention appeared that challenged people's understanding of what was possible. When technology advances that quickly, yesterday's fantasy often becomes tomorrow's reality. This was the world in which the first great American sky mystery emerged. Beginning in 1896, newspapers across California started publishing reports of an extraordinary object moving through the night. Witnesses described a gigantic cigar-shaped craft equipped with brilliant lights. Some claimed it hovered silently over towns before drifting away into the darkness. Others insisted they could hear mechanical sounds unlike anything they had experienced before. Within weeks, similar reports spread across the American Midwest. Illinois, Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Kansas, the mysterious airship seemed to be traveling eastward, leaving behind hundreds of astonished witnesses. People described propellers, wings, searchlights, and even human occupants waving from the craft. Some newspapers treated the stories as serious news. Others openly mocked them. Entrepreneurs claimed to know the inventors behind the incredible machine. Hoaxers fabricated elaborate tales that spread even faster than the original sightings. The United States had entered its first nationwide aerial mystery. Looking back today, many historians believe these reports were a fascinating mixture of genuine misidentifications, exaggerated journalism, public excitement, and outright fabrication. But what makes the airship wave remarkable is not whether the sightings were real. It is what Americans believed might be possible. Powered flight had not yet been achieved. The Wright brothers would not fly at Kitty Hawk for another 6 years. Yet many people found it easier to believe that a secret inventor had already built an advanced flying machine than to dismiss the reports entirely. Why? Because America had become a nation obsessed with invention. Thomas Edison was regularly unveiling new technologies. Alexander Graham Bell had revolutionized communication with the telephone. Nikola Tesla was demonstrating electrical systems that seemed almost magical to audiences unfamiliar with alternating current. If electricity could light entire cities overnight, why couldn't someone secretly invent a flying machine? The line between science fiction and scientific possibility had never been thinner. Although the great airship scare eventually faded away, it revealed something important about American society. People were ready to believe that astonishing technology might exist somewhere beyond public view. That idea would return again and again over the next century. Then, in December 1903, two bicycle mechanics from Dayton, Ohio, permanently changed humanity's relationship with the sky. When Orville and Wilbur Wright lifted their fragile aircraft into the air above the dunes of Kitty Hawk, the flight lasted less than a minute. By modern standards, it was almost laughably short. But history rarely announces itself with grand spectacles. That brief flight proved something that countless experts had doubted. Controlled, powered, human flight was possible. The consequences spread faster than almost anyone imagined. Within a decade, airplanes evolved from fragile experimental machines into increasingly reliable aircraft. Governments quickly recognized their military potential. Wealthy adventurers raced to set altitude and distance records. Crowds gathered by the thousands simply to watch pilots perform aerial demonstrations. The sky was no longer empty. It had become a frontier. As aviation advanced, reports of strange objects naturally increased. Sometimes people simply misidentified unfamiliar aircraft. Sometimes experimental designs looked so unusual that observers struggled to describe them. Airplanes themselves seemed almost supernatural to communities seeing one for the first time. Human perception has always depended on expectation. When people encounter something completely unfamiliar, the brain instinctively searches for the closest comparison it already understands. That simple fact would later become one of the greatest challenges facing UFO investigators. By the time the First World War erupted in Europe, aircraft technology was improving almost monthly. Fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, and observation balloons transformed warfare forever. The war also introduced another lesson. Military technology developed in secret. Entire aircraft programs remained hidden until they appeared over battlefields. Engineers constantly searched for advantages that enemies did not yet understand. Governments embraced secrecy as a strategic necessity. That culture of classified innovation would become even more important during the decades ahead. After the war, aviation entered what many historians call its golden age. Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic alone in 1927, becoming an international hero almost overnight. Amelia Earhart inspired millions while pushing aviation into new territory. Air races captured newspaper headlines. Airports appeared near growing cities. Commercial airlines slowly convinced travelers that flying was becoming safe. Each achievement made the impossible seem ordinary, and each breakthrough encouraged engineers to dream even bigger. Meanwhile, popular culture was changing just as rapidly. Science fiction magazines filled newsstands with stories of futuristic aircraft, visitors from other planets, and civilizations traveling through space. Comic strips imagined incredible machines crossing the heavens. Radio dramas brought alien invasions into family living rooms. These stories were entertainment, but they also expanded the public imagination. By the 1930s, millions of Americans had grown comfortable imagining worlds beyond Earth. Then came World War II. The conflict accelerated technological progress more dramatically than any previous event in human history. Radar could detect aircraft long before they became visible. Jet engines promised speeds that piston-powered airplanes could never reach. Rockets climbed higher into the atmosphere than anyone had believed possible. Scientists unlocked the atom itself. Every year of the war produced inventions that would have sounded impossible before it began. To ordinary people, technology was beginning to feel almost magical. And then pilots started reporting something they could not explain. Night after night, American bomber crews flying dangerous missions over Europe described glowing spheres of light pacing their aircraft. Sometimes the lights appeared beside a wing, sometimes they followed bombers for miles before suddenly disappearing. The objects did not attack. they simply watched. Similar reports emerged from the Pacific Theater. The pilots gave these mysterious lights an unforgettable nickname: Foo Fighters. The name probably came from a popular comic strip phrase, but the mystery itself was deadly serious. Veteran combat pilots were not easily frightened. These were men accustomed to anti-aircraft fire, enemy fighters, mechanical failures, and exhausting missions over hostile territory. They understood aircraft, yet many insisted they had witnessed something entirely unfamiliar. Military intelligence investigated. Could these lights be secret German weapons? Advanced Japanese technology? Some unusual atmospheric phenomenon? No definitive answer emerged. Today, historians generally believe many Foo Fighter reports likely involved natural electrical phenomena such as St. Elmo's fire, unusual reflections, distant aircraft, or psychological effects created by extreme stress and fatigue. But not every report fits neatly into those categories. More importantly, the investigations established an important precedent. Military organizations now took unexplained aerial observations seriously, not because they expected alien visitors, because unidentified objects could represent enemy technology. That distinction mattered enormously. As World War II drew to a close, the United States emerged as the world's dominant industrial power. Its factories had produced astonishing quantities of aircraft, tanks, ships, and weapons. American scientists had built the atomic bomb. The country possessed unmatched economic strength. But victory did not bring peace of mind. Instead, it introduced a new kind of fear. The wartime alliance with the Soviet Union quickly collapsed. Former allies became rivals almost overnight. The Cold War had begun. Unlike previous conflicts, this struggle depended heavily on information. Who possessed the better aircraft? Who had more powerful rockets? Who developed superior radar? Who achieved breakthroughs first? Both superpowers invested enormous resources into intelligence gathering. American military planners worried constantly about Soviet bombers carrying nuclear weapons across the Arctic. Radar stations expanded across North America. Air defense became one of the nation's highest priorities. Every unidentified aircraft now represented a potential national security emergency. Imagine sitting inside a radar control room in 1946. A strange object suddenly appears on the screen. You cannot immediately identify it. Is it equipment malfunction? A weather balloon? A civilian aircraft? Or is it the first sign of a surprise nuclear attack? The stakes had changed completely. An unexplained object in the sky was no longer simply a curiosity. It might determine the survival of millions. This atmosphere profoundly influenced how Americans viewed unusual sightings. People became more observant, more anxious, more willing to report anything that appeared unusual overhead. Military personnel received additional training to recognize aircraft. Civil defense organizations encouraged vigilance. Newspapers regularly covered advances in aviation and missile technology. The public looked upward more often than ever before. At the same time, the U.S. government was quietly absorbing one of the greatest scientific prizes of the war: German rocket technology. Through a highly secretive effort later known as Operation Paperclip, dozens of German engineers, including Wernher von Braun and his team, were brought to the United States to continue developing advanced rockets. Their expertise would eventually help America build ballistic missiles and, years later, send astronauts to the moon. But in the late 1940s, much of this work remained hidden behind layers of military secrecy. Experimental aircraft flew from isolated test ranges. Prototype missiles streaked across desert skies. New radar systems constantly pushed the limits of detection. Even many military officers had only partial knowledge of these classified programs. This created the perfect conditions for misunderstanding. People witnessed things that genuinely existed but could not be publicly explained. Others saw ordinary phenomena through the lens of growing Cold War anxiety. Some fabricated stories for attention, some sincerely described experiences that investigators could never fully explain. Reality, secrecy, psychology, and imagination were beginning to overlap. No one realized just how dramatically these forces were about to collide. Because in the summer of 1947, a businessman flying over the Cascade Mountains would report seeing 9 strange objects skipping across the sky like a saucer across water. Within days, newspapers across America would coin a phrase that has never disappeared from public imagination: flying saucers. And from that moment on, America would never look at its skies the same way again. On the afternoon of June 24, 1947, businessman and private pilot Kenneth Arnold climbed into the cockpit of his Call-Air A-2 and took off from Chehalis, Washington. It was supposed to be an ordinary flight. Arnold was a successful salesman, experienced in the air and well acquainted with the rugged landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Flying was not just a hobby, it was part of his work. He had logged hundreds of hours in the cockpit and knew how mountains, clouds, sunlight, and weather could play tricks on a pilot's eyes. That afternoon, he wasn't searching for mysteries, he was searching for money. A Marine Corps C-46 transport aircraft had recently crashed near Mount Rainier, and a reward had been offered for locating the wreckage. As Arnold flew near the towering volcanic peak scanning the slopes below, he expected to find twisted metal hidden among the snowfields. Instead, something else found him. A sudden flash caught his attention. At first, he assumed it was sunlight reflecting off another airplane. Then, he noticed another flash, and another. Soon he counted 9 bright objects moving in formation across the sky. What happened over the next few minutes would become one of the most discussed events in modern American history. Arnold later described the objects as thin, flat, and highly reflective. Some appeared crescent-shaped, while others looked slightly different depending on the angle. They flew in an uneven line, weaving between the snow-covered peaks of Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. But it wasn't their appearance that stunned him. It was their speed. Arnold watched as they crossed a distance of roughly 50 miles in less than 2 minutes. Using landmarks and his watch, he estimated they were traveling at over 1,200 miles per hour. That number was almost impossible. The fastest military aircraft of the time were nowhere near that speed. The sound barrier itself had not yet been officially broken. Chuck Yeager's famous Bell X-1 flight was still months away. Whatever Arnold had seen seemed to violate everything pilots believed about aviation. When he landed in Yakima and later spoke with reporters, he carefully described how the objects moved. He said they flew like a saucer if you skip it across water. It was a comparison about motion, not shape, but newspapers misunderstood. The next day's headlines transformed his description into something entirely different. Flying saucers. The phrase exploded across America almost overnight. It was catchy, simple, impossible to forget. And once people had a name for the phenomenon, they began seeing it everywhere. Within days, newspapers from coast to coast were flooded with reports. Farmers claimed strange discs had passed over their fields. Police officers described brilliant objects racing across the horizon. Commercial pilots reported unusual formations. Families gathered outside after dinner hoping to glimpse the mysterious visitors themselves. Some sightings were almost certainly honest mistakes. People mistook weather balloons, unusual clouds, bright planets, and distant aircraft for the newly famous flying saucers. Others were exaggerations fueled by excitement. A few were deliberate hoaxes. Yet buried among the thousands of reports were accounts from experienced observers that investigators struggled to dismiss. The summer of 1947 had become something America had never experienced before. A nationwide wave of unexplained aerial sightings. The timing could hardly have been more significant. Only 2 years had passed since World War II ended. Millions of veterans had returned home after serving in one of history's most technologically advanced conflicts. They had seen radar, jet aircraft, rockets, and weapons whose existence had once been secret. Americans had learned an important lesson during the war. Governments often possessed technology the public knew nothing about. When people reported strange aircraft in the sky, it was no longer unreasonable to wonder whether another revolutionary invention had emerged behind closed doors. Military officials immediately began asking uncomfortable questions. Could the Soviet Union have developed an advanced aircraft? Had German wartime research continued in unexpected ways? Was some secret American project accidentally being observed by civilians? Or was something else happening entirely? The Air Force, still part of the Army at the time, could not simply ignore these possibilities. Intelligence officers quietly collected reports while trying to separate genuine security concerns from public excitement. But before investigators could make much progress, another event transformed the story forever. It began in the deserts of southeastern New Mexico. The region around Roswell was unlike almost anywhere else in America. Wide open spaces stretched toward the horizon. The weather was generally clear. During World War II, the isolation had made it an ideal location for military facilities. Most importantly, Roswell Army Airfield housed one of the world's only nuclear-capable bomber groups. This was not an ordinary military base. It stood at the center of America's new atomic strategy. That made what happened in July 1947 especially remarkable. A rancher named William Mac Brazel discovered unusual debris scattered across his property after a storm. The material looked strange: thin metallic sheets, rubber-like fragments, lightweight sticks, foil that reportedly resisted crumpling. Curious about the nationwide flying saucer stories, Brazel eventually reported his discovery to local authorities. The military responded quickly. Personnel collected the debris. Then, something unexpected happened. The public information officer at Roswell Army Airfield issued a press release announcing that the Army had recovered a flying disc. The headline raced around the world. For a brief moment, it appeared that the U.S. military itself had confirmed the existence of a flying saucer. Then, almost as quickly, everything changed. Within 24 hours, senior officers reversed the announcement. New photographs showed weather balloon debris spread across an office floor. Officials explained that the earlier report had been a simple mistake. The object was not a flying disc. It was merely a weather balloon. The story faded from national headlines almost immediately, at least for a while. Decades later, Roswell would become perhaps the most famous UFO incident in history, spawning countless books, documentaries, television shows, and conspiracy theories. But understanding why requires understanding what remained secret for nearly 50 years. The balloon explanation was not entirely accurate. Neither, however, was the idea that the military had recovered an alien spacecraft. The real answer lay hidden inside one of the Cold War's most closely guarded programs, known as Project Mogul. It involved enormous high-altitude balloon arrays carrying sensitive equipment designed to detect Soviet nuclear weapons tests. These balloons flew much higher than ordinary weather balloons and used unusual materials that would have appeared unfamiliar even to many military personnel. Because Project Mogul was classified, officials could not publicly explain what had actually crashed. Instead, they substituted the simpler weather balloon story. In doing so, they unintentionally created one of history's greatest mysteries. The irony is striking. A genuine government secret became hidden behind a false public explanation. When later generations discovered that the weather balloon story had been incomplete, many assumed every official explanation must also have been false. Distrust grew. Speculation flourished. Sometimes secrecy creates exactly the suspicions it hopes to prevent. Roswell demonstrated that lesson perfectly. Meanwhile, reports continued arriving from across the country. Some described silent discs, others reported glowing spheres, still others mentioned cigar-shaped craft or triangular formations. No consistent pattern emerged. This inconsistency actually made investigation more difficult. If everyone described exactly the same object, perhaps investigators could identify a common source. Instead, witnesses reported a bewildering variety of shapes, colors, speeds, and behaviors. Psychologists would later point out an important factor. Once newspapers introduced the phrase "flying saucer." They also introduced an expectation. People observing something unusual often interpreted it through the lens of recent headlines. Human memory is surprisingly flexible. Witnesses rarely invent experiences intentionally, but memories can be shaped by language, discussion, and cultural influences. Investigators eventually learned that interviewing witnesses quickly often produced more reliable accounts than interviews conducted weeks later. As stories spread, details sometimes changed without anyone realizing it. This complicated every investigation. Yet military intelligence remained uneasy for another reason entirely. Not because of extraterrestrials, because of information overload. Imagine an enemy planning a surprise attack. One simple strategy would be to flood authorities with false reports. Thousands of imaginary sightings could overwhelm communication networks, distract military personnel, and hide genuine threats among endless noise. The possibility seemed realistic enough to concern defense planners. In January 1948, those fears intensified after one of the most tragic encounters in early UFO history. Captain Thomas Mantell, an experienced Kentucky Air National Guard pilot and decorated World War II veteran, was ordered to intercept a mysterious object seen over Fort Knox. Mantell climbed higher and higher in pursuit. Radio communications described an object of tremendous size. Then, contact was lost. His aircraft crashed, killing him instantly. For years, speculation surrounded the incident. Had he chased an alien spacecraft? Had he encountered some unknown phenomenon? Later analysis suggested a far more earthly explanation. Mantell likely pursued a skyhook balloon, a classified high-altitude research balloon unfamiliar to many pilots at the time. As he climbed beyond the safe operating altitude of his aircraft without supplemental oxygen, hypoxia probably impaired his judgment before he lost consciousness. The tragedy highlighted another unintended consequence of Cold War secrecy. Pilots sometimes risked their lives chasing classified objects they had never been told existed. Military technology and public misunderstanding were becoming deeply intertwined. The government faced an increasingly difficult balancing act. Reveal classified programs and national security suffered. Conceal them, and mysterious sightings multiplied. Every solution created a new problem. By late 1948, Air Force intelligence officers reached an unavoidable conclusion. The phenomenon, whatever its causes, was real in one important sense. People were genuinely reporting unexplained objects. The reports were not going away. Some could be solved easily, others resisted every conventional explanation. Most importantly, the number of cases continued growing. The Air Force needed a systematic approach. Individual investigations scattered across different offices were no longer enough. America required an official program dedicated to understanding what people were seeing in its skies. That decision would launch the first organized military investigation into unidentified flying objects. It would begin under a hopeful name: Project Sign. Its investigators believed that careful science, disciplined intelligence work, and patient analysis might finally solve the mystery. Instead, they would discover that the deeper they looked, the more complicated the story became. And before long, their own conclusions would divide the Air Force itself. As we leave those early investigations behind, imagine the lights inside the Air Force offices gradually dimming for the night. Filing cabinets are closed, typewriters fall silent, and outside the windows the Ohio sky is calm once again. While the investigators rest, countless stars continue their quiet journey overhead. So, if you're getting comfortable or beginning to fall asleep, simply relax. The mystery will still be waiting for us when the morning arrives. By the end of 1948, the United States Air Force found itself in an uncomfortable position. Officially, there was no evidence that mysterious objects in the sky represented extraterrestrial visitors. Unofficially, there were thousands of pages of reports sitting inside military filing cabinets that refused to fit neatly into ordinary explanations. Every new sighting raised the same questions. Was this a threat? Was it a mistake? Or was it something entirely new? For the newly independent U.S. Air Force, established only in 1947, these questions were impossible to ignore. The service had been created for one purpose above all others: defending American airspace. If unknown objects were repeatedly entering that airspace, investigating them was not optional. It was part of the job. That responsibility led to the creation of the Air Force's first formal UFO investigation. Its name reflected cautious optimism. Project Sign. Based at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, Project Sign brought together intelligence officers, engineers, pilots, and technical specialists. Their mission sounded straightforward enough: collect reports, analyze evidence, and determine whether unidentified flying objects posed any danger to the United States. But from the beginning, investigators faced a problem that had nothing to do with flying objects. They were trying to solve a mystery without agreeing on what the mystery actually was. Inside Project Sign, opinions quickly divided into several camps. Some officers believed most reports could be explained by ordinary causes: misidentified aircraft, balloons, planets, weather conditions, or simple mistakes made by frightened or excited witnesses. Others believed the Soviet Union might have developed revolutionary aircraft using technology captured from Nazi Germany, considering the rapid advances in aviation during World War II. This was not an unreasonable concern. German engineers had created jet fighters, guided missiles, and rockets years ahead of their time. Both the United States and the Soviet Union had rushed to recruit German scientists after the war ended. If anyone possessed secret technology capable of surprising America, the Soviets were near the top of the list. Then there was a much smaller group. These investigators did not claim to know the answer. But after reviewing some of the strongest cases, they began wondering whether conventional explanations were enough. Several reports came from experienced military pilots. Others included simultaneous visual observations and radar contacts. A handful described flight characteristics that seemed impossible according to the known laws of aviation. These officers reluctantly considered an extraordinary possibility. What if some objects truly were not made by any nation on Earth? That idea was so astonishing that few people even wanted to say it aloud. Yet according to later accounts from individuals involved in the project, some investigators eventually prepared a classified document known as the Estimate of the Situation. The report has become one of the most debated documents in UFO history. No verified copy has ever surfaced. Most historians believe the original was destroyed or discarded. but multiple participants later claimed the report argued that at least some sightings were best explained by what became known as the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If true, it represented an extraordinary moment. Not because the Air Force officially believed aliens were visiting Earth, it did not. Rather, because a small group of investigators had reached a conclusion so controversial that senior leadership reportedly rejected it almost immediately. General Hoyt Vandenberg, then Air Force Chief of Staff, allegedly dismissed the report for lacking sufficient evidence. Whether every detail of that story is accurate remains uncertain. What is clear is that Project Sign soon underwent a dramatic change in direction. The atmosphere shifted from open investigation to growing skepticism. In early 1949, Project Sign was replaced. The new program carried a remarkably revealing name: Project Grudge. Names matter. Sign suggested a search for meaning. Grudge suggested irritation. Many historians believe the change reflected frustration inside Air Force leadership. Rather than pursuing every unusual report with equal enthusiasm, Project Grudge adopted a far more skeptical approach. Its investigators assumed that most sightings could and should be explained away whenever possible. This change was shaped by more than scientific debate. America itself was changing rapidly. The Cold War was becoming colder. In 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its first atomic bomb, ending America's nuclear monopoly years earlier than expected. That same year, Communist forces won the Chinese Civil War, creating the People's Republic of China. Across Washington, officials increasingly feared espionage, infiltration, and surprise attack. Resources were limited. Military planners worried that excessive attention to flying saucers distracted intelligence officers from genuine threats. Some leaders also feared something less obvious: public panic. Imagine newspaper headlines screaming about mysterious aircraft crossing American skies every week. Citizens might begin questioning whether the government could protect them. Enemy governments might exploit the uncertainty through propaganda. False reports could overwhelm communication networks during a real crisis. From this perspective, reducing public fascination became almost as important as solving individual cases. Project Grudge reflected that philosophy. Many investigations became shorter. Witness testimony was sometimes dismissed quickly. Psychological explanations gained greater emphasis. Official reports frequently concluded that observers had misidentified ordinary objects or experienced optical illusions. To be fair, many reports truly did have ordinary explanations. Venus often appeared astonishingly bright under certain atmospheric conditions. Weather balloons drifted in unexpected ways. Temperature inversions created unusual radar echoes. Experimental aircraft occasionally wandered into public view. Human beings are surprisingly poor at judging the size, speed, and distance of unfamiliar objects seen against an empty sky. Investigators learned that even honest witnesses could sincerely disagree about what they had observed. Yet critics argued that Project Grudge sometimes allowed skepticism to become a conclusion rather than a method. Instead of asking, "What happened?" investigators occasionally seemed to ask, "How can we explain this away?" That distinction mattered enormously. Among those who grew increasingly frustrated was an astronomer named Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Hynek had joined the Air Force as a scientific consultant. His role was not to prove UFOs existed. Quite the opposite. He was expected to provide conventional astronomical explanations whenever possible. If a witness mistook Venus for a flying saucer, Hynek would identify the error. If a meteor produced confusion, he would explain the phenomenon. Initially, Hynek viewed most reports with open skepticism. He believed careful scientific analysis would resolve nearly every case. and indeed, many were solved exactly that way. But something unexpected began happening. Every time investigators explained one group of sightings, another group appeared that seemed much more difficult. Some reports simply refused to cooperate. Years later, Hynek admitted that dismissing every witness as mistaken became increasingly difficult. Many observers were intelligent, experienced, and sincere. Some had backgrounds in aviation or science. Others described details that were surprisingly consistent despite having no connection to one another. Hynek remained cautious. He did not suddenly embrace extraordinary conclusions. Instead, he reached a more modest realization. Some cases deserved better investigation than they were receiving. His gradual transformation would later make him one of the most influential figures in UFO history. But before that could happen, America experienced another wave of sightings. This one was impossible to ignore. The Korean War erupted in June 1950, once again placing the United States on a wartime footing. Military aircraft filled the skies. Radar systems expanded rapidly. Air defense became an obsession. The increased number of aircraft naturally produced more opportunities for misidentification. At the same time, improved radar technology detected objects that earlier generations could never have seen. Operators sometimes struggled to distinguish genuine targets from equipment anomalies or unusual atmospheric conditions. The line between technological progress and technological confusion grew thinner. Then came 1952. Historians of the UFO phenomenon often describe it as the most important year before the modern era. Reports surged across the United States. Commercial pilots, military crews, ground observers, police officers. The Air Force suddenly found itself buried under thousands of new cases. The existing investigative system simply could not keep up. Officials realized another organizational change was necessary. This time, they chose a more neutral name: Project Blue Book. Established in March 1952 and headquartered once again at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Blue Book inherited the files of its predecessors while attempting to create a more systematic process. Investigators developed standardized reporting forms. Witness interviews became more structured. Photographs, radar data, weather records, astronomical information, and flight logs were compared whenever possible. Instead of treating every report as identical, cases were categorized according to available evidence. Blue Book had 3 official objectives. First, determine whether UFOs posed any threat to national security. Second, analyze the scientific and technical aspects of reported sightings. Third, explain the phenomenon whenever sufficient evidence allowed. These goals sounded balanced, yet behind closed doors another tension persisted. Should Blue Book primarily investigate mysteries, or should it reassure the public? Those objectives were not always compatible. If investigators emphasized uncertainty, newspapers might sensationalize unresolved cases. If they emphasized ordinary explanations, critics might accuse the Air Force of hiding embarrassing information. No matter what Blue Book concluded, someone would almost certainly be dissatisfied. That challenge became dramatically clear during the summer of 1952. In July, radar operators at Washington National Airport began detecting strange targets over the nation's capital. Soon, Andrews Air Force Base reported similar contacts. Commercial airline pilots saw unusual lights. Military personnel observed objects visually while radar tracked them simultaneously. Fighter aircraft were scrambled. As jets approached, the mysterious targets disappeared. When the fighters landed because of low fuel, the objects reportedly returned. The events repeated themselves over multiple weekends. Unlike many earlier sightings, these occurred above Washington, D.C., the political heart of the United States. Newspapers erupted. If unidentified objects could appear over the Capitol itself, what did that say about American air defenses? The Air Force faced intense pressure. Officials organized what was then the largest Pentagon press conference since World War II. They explained that unusual weather conditions, particularly temperature inversions, likely produced false radar returns, while bright stars and city lights contributed to visual confusion. Many scientists considered that explanation plausible. Some radar specialists remained unconvinced. Public debate intensified rather than disappeared. For Blue Book investigators, the Washington incidents marked a turning point. The project was no longer a relatively obscure intelligence effort. It had become front-page news. Congress wanted answers. Journalists demanded interviews. Citizens mailed letters by the thousands. The investigation of unidentified flying objects had become a national issue, and that attention worried the Central Intelligence Agency, not because officials believed Washington was under attack by extraterrestrials, but because mass public fascination itself had become a potential security problem. If millions of Americans reported every unusual light in the sky, intelligence networks could become overwhelmed. In the event of a genuine Soviet attack, vital communications might be delayed by waves of false alarms. The mystery had evolved beyond aviation. It had become a question of national preparedness. Early in 1953, some of America's most respected scientists gathered behind closed doors to consider what should happen next. Their conclusions would shape Project Blue Book and America's official approach to UFOs for years to come. If you had walked into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on an ordinary weekday in the mid-1950s, you would have seen one of the busiest military installations in the United States. The base, located just outside Dayton, Ohio, was already famous as the birthplace of American aviation. Only a few miles away, the Wright brothers had built and tested some of the world's earliest airplanes. During World War II, Wright-Patterson had grown into one of the Air Force's most important research and logistics centers. Engineers developed new aircraft here. Intelligence officers analyzed captured enemy technology. Laboratories studied everything from jet engines to flight medicine. Among all those critical missions was a surprisingly small office responsible for one of the most controversial investigations in America. This was Project Blue Book. Hollywood has often imagined it as a sprawling underground complex filled with endless rows of classified files, mysterious artifacts, and scientists in white coats whispering about alien visitors. The reality was much less dramatic. For most of its existence, Blue Book consisted of only a handful of officers, civilian employees, clerks, and consultants working out of ordinary offices, with overflowing filing cabinets and stacks of paperwork that seemed to grow faster every month. Their biggest challenge was not hiding secrets. It was keeping up. By the early 1950s, reports of unidentified flying objects were arriving from every corner of the United States. Some came by telephone, others arrived in handwritten letters. Police departments mailed incident reports. Local Air Force bases forwarded interviews with military personnel. Commercial airlines submitted statements from flight crews. Occasionally, newspapers would publish a sensational story before the Air Force even learned about the event. Every report had to be processed. Imagine opening the office door on a Monday morning. A pilot claims a brilliant object paced his aircraft for 20 minutes. A sheriff describes glowing lights hovering over a rural highway. A family insists a metallic disc landed in a nearby field. An Air Force radar station reports an unknown target moving across restricted airspace. A farmer sends photographs showing strange lights above his barn. A child mails a drawing of something that terrified him while walking home. Some reports were only a few sentences long. Others filled dozens of pages. Blue Book investigators could not afford to assume every witness was mistaken. Nor could they assume every report represented something extraordinary. They had to investigate. That process usually began with a deceptively simple question: who saw it? The answer mattered enormously. An experienced military pilot trained to recognize aircraft carried more weight than an anonymous rumor passed from neighbor to neighbor. A radar operator with years of technical experience provided different evidence than someone glimpsing a light for only a few seconds while driving home at night. Investigators looked closely at each witness's background. What was their profession? Had they served in the military? Were they familiar with aviation? Did they wear corrective lenses? Had they ever filed similar reports before? None of these questions determined whether someone was telling the truth. Instead, they helped investigators judge how much confidence to place in specific observations. Next came the timing. Exactly when had the sighting occurred? Weather records were checked. Astronomical charts identified the positions of planets and bright stars. Meteor showers were reviewed. Nearby airports provided flight logs. Military bases confirmed whether training exercises had taken place. Balloon launches were examined. Even newspaper archives sometimes proved useful. If hundreds of people across several states reported seeing a bright fireball at precisely the same moment, investigators might discover that a meteor had streaked across the atmosphere. Many mysteries disappeared surprisingly quickly. Venus became one of Blue Book's most frequent visitors. Under certain conditions, the planet appears astonishingly bright shortly after sunset or before sunrise. When viewed through layers of turbulent atmosphere near the horizon, it can seem to shimmer, change colors, or even appear to move. Countless sincere witnesses believed they were watching a hovering craft. They were actually looking at the second brightest natural object in the night sky. Weather balloons caused similar confusion. Most Americans had never seen one. High-altitude balloons often reflected sunlight long after the ground below had grown dark. They drifted with upper-level winds invisible from the surface and could appear strangely motionless depending on the observer's perspective. Then there were temperature inversions. To most people, the phrase sounds technical and unimportant. To Blue Book investigators, it became almost routine. Normally, air becomes colder with altitude. Occasionally, a layer of warm air traps cooler air beneath it. Radar signals passing through these unusual atmospheric conditions can bend in unexpected ways, creating false echoes that appear to be solid objects. In some famous cases, visual sightings occurred at the same time. Investigators then faced a difficult puzzle. Were witnesses seeing actual objects while radar independently malfunctioned? Or were unrelated visual observations becoming linked to misleading radar returns? The answer was not always obvious. Photography presented another challenge. Today, nearly everyone carries a high-resolution camera inside a smartphone. In the 1950s, cameras were far less common. Film required careful exposure. Night photography was especially difficult. Long shutter speeds often transformed ordinary lights into blurry streaks. Dust particles reflected camera flashes. Lens imperfections produced unusual shapes. Blue Book received hundreds of photographs. Many looked impressive. Few provided definitive evidence. Investigators frequently consulted photographic experts capable of identifying double exposures, processing errors, reflections, and other common artifacts. Sometimes they solved the mystery immediately. Other times the images remained frustratingly inconclusive. One of Blue Book's greatest strengths and greatest weaknesses was its commitment to documentation. Every interview was written down, every weather report attached, every radar record filed, every photograph labeled. Thousands upon thousands of pages accumulated over the years. The result was one of the largest collections of unexplained aerial observations ever assembled by a government. Yet paperwork alone could not solve mysteries. Human judgment remained essential. And human judgment is rarely perfect. Inside the office, disagreements were common. One investigator might believe a witness had honestly mistaken Venus for an aircraft. Another argued that the witness's detailed description ruled out any astronomical explanation. Sometimes cases were reopened after new evidence emerged. Sometimes they were closed despite lingering questions simply because no additional information could be obtained. This uncertainty frustrated everyone involved. Among the most respected voices inside Blue Book remained Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Officially, Hynek served as an astronomical consultant. Unofficially, he became something of a bridge between skeptical science and curious investigation. Whenever a case appeared especially unusual, Hynek examined it personally. At first, he approached the reports exactly as the Air Force expected. Find the ordinary explanation. And often he did. He explained meteors mistaken for speeding craft. He identified planets. He corrected misunderstandings involving stars. He patiently demonstrated how atmospheric conditions could fool even experienced observers. But over time, patterns began to emerge, not in the sightings themselves, in the witnesses. Again and again, Hynek encountered individuals who impressed him. Commercial airline captains, military officers, engineers, scientists, police officers, people with reputations built on careful observation. Many openly admitted they had no idea what they had seen. They did not claim little green men had landed. They simply described events that did not fit their understanding of ordinary aircraft. Hynek later recalled feeling uncomfortable when investigators dismissed such people too quickly. Science, he believed, should begin with careful observation, not immediate conclusions. That attitude slowly set him apart from some Air Force officials. Another challenge facing Blue Book was geography. America is enormous. Reports arrived from deserts in Arizona, forests in Maine, isolated farms in Kansas, crowded neighborhoods in New York City, mountain valleys in Colorado, and coastal communities overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Sending investigators everywhere was impossible. Many local Air Force bases conducted initial interviews before forwarding reports to Wright-Patterson. This created unavoidable inconsistencies. Some investigators were meticulous, others hurried through interviews, some asked detailed follow-up questions, others accepted brief summaries. The quality of evidence varied tremendously. Then there was the problem of time. Witnesses rarely reported events immediately. Sometimes days passed, occasionally weeks. Human memory changes surprisingly quickly. People unintentionally fill gaps, merge conversations into memories, or emphasize details repeated by others. Blue Book gradually learned that the sooner investigators interviewed witnesses, the more reliable the information tended to be. Even then, certainty remained elusive. Not every challenge came from sincere observers. The project also dealt with pranksters. Teenagers tied lights to homemade balloons. Photographers staged elaborate hoaxes using models suspended by fishing line. Some people sought newspaper attention, others enjoyed fooling the government. Each false report consumed valuable time. Investigators had to distinguish deliberate deception from honest mistakes without becoming cynical toward everyone. That balance proved surprisingly difficult. As years passed, Blue Book developed categories for closing cases. Many were labeled identified: aircraft, astronomical bodies, weather balloons, birds, cloud formations, searchlights reflecting from low clouds, meteors, satellites after the late 1950s. Others remained insufficient information. Perhaps the witness could not be located. Perhaps details were too vague. Perhaps evidence simply ran out. Then there was one final category. Unknown, contrary to popular belief, this designation did not mean investigators believed extraterrestrials were responsible. It meant something much simpler. After examining available evidence, they could not confidently identify what had been observed. The distinction was important. Unknown did not equal alien. It meant unresolved. Still, unresolved cases fascinated the public far more than ordinary explanations ever could. Out of more than 12,000 reports eventually examined by Project Blue Book, the overwhelming majority received conventional explanations, yet hundreds remained officially unidentified. Those few cases cast an enormous shadow over all the others. Critics argued they proved the Air Force had encountered genuine mysteries. Skeptics responded that unresolved cases are inevitable in any large investigation. Some crimes remain unsolved. Some aircraft disappear without explanation. Some astronomical events remain poorly understood until better data becomes available. Both arguments contain truth. Blue Book never claimed that every case had been solved, nor did it conclude that unexplained reports demonstrated visitors from another world. Instead, the project existed in an uncomfortable middle ground. Investigators acknowledged uncertainty more often than either believers or skeptics preferred. Meanwhile, outside the office walls, another reality complicated everything. Unknown to most Blue Book personnel, the United States was entering one of the greatest periods of secret aircraft development in history. High above ordinary commercial air traffic, sleek experimental airplanes were beginning to fly at altitudes no civilian aircraft could reach. Engineers were testing revolutionary designs hidden deep inside restricted military ranges. Many of these aircraft looked unlike anything the public had ever seen. Even some Air Force officers investigating UFO reports were not cleared to know they existed. As a result, the people searching for answers were sometimes denied the very information that might have solved the mystery. It was a perfect recipe for confusion. And before long, some of America's most famous UFO sightings would turn out to be connected, not to visitors from another planet, but to some of the Cold War's most closely guarded secrets. By the mid-1950s, Project Blue Book had settled into a familiar rhythm. Every week, reports arrived. Every week, investigators examined witness statements, weather records, radar logs, astronomical charts, and flight schedules. Most of the time, the mystery lasted only a few hours. A bright planet, a weather balloon, an experimental aircraft, a flock of birds reflecting the setting sun. Case closed. But every so often, a file landed on an investigator's desk that refused to cooperate. The witness was credible. The evidence was unusually detailed. The timeline made sense. Every ordinary explanation seemed to create more questions than answers. These were the cases that kept Blue Book alive, not because they proved extraordinary claims, but because they reminded everyone involved that certainty is much harder to achieve than people often imagine. One of the earliest and most dramatic arrived in the summer of 1952. America was already experiencing an extraordinary wave of UFO reports. Newspapers ran stories almost daily. Telephone lines at Air Force offices buzzed with new sightings. Many officials assumed public excitement had created a self-reinforcing cycle. The more people read about flying saucers, the more likely they were to interpret ordinary events as mysterious. Then, something happened that could not be dismissed as a newspaper rumor. Late on the evening of July 19, 1952, Air Traffic Controller Edward Nugent was monitoring radar at Washington National Airport. The room was quiet. Commercial flights were following their expected routes. Then, several bright radar targets suddenly appeared southwest of the city. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Radar operators regularly tracked aircraft moving toward Washington. But these targets behaved differently. They accelerated rapidly. Stopped, changed direction, moved again. No known airplane could perform maneuvers like that. Nugent checked the equipment carefully. Everything appeared to be functioning normally. He called another controller. The second operator saw the same targets. Soon the airport's chief radar controller joined them. He also confirmed the strange echoes. Almost simultaneously, radar operators at nearby Andrews Air Force Base began detecting unidentified targets of their own. The military and civilian systems were independent. Yet both appeared to be tracking the same unusual activity. This immediately raised the stakes. Equipment failures happen. Two independent radar systems producing nearly identical false targets at the same time is far less common. As controllers watched their screens, pilots flying in the area also began reporting strange lights. Captain S.C. Casey Pierman of Capital Airlines described brilliant glowing objects unlike ordinary aircraft. Another pilot saw 6 bright lights moving at tremendous speed. Observers on the ground reported unusual aerial activity as well. For several hours, Washington's airspace became one of the most carefully observed places in America. Finally, the Air Force scrambled F-94 Starfire interceptor jets. The public expected answers. Instead, the mystery deepened. As the fighters approached, the radar targets disappeared. Once the jets left because of limited fuel, the unidentified returns reportedly reappeared. Again and again, the same pattern unfolded. Controllers could see the objects. Pilots often could not. Sometimes pilots saw lights with no corresponding radar contact. Other times, radar detected targets without visual confirmation. The relationship between the two remained frustratingly inconsistent. 1 week later, on July 26, the phenomenon returned. Once again, strange radar contacts appeared over Washington. Once again, interceptor aircraft were launched. Once again, reports flooded in from both military and civilian observers. The nation's capital had become the center of international attention. Newspapers around the world carried dramatic headlines. Flying saucers over Washington. Congress demanded explanations. The White House requested briefings. The Air Force suddenly found itself confronting one of the largest public relations challenges in its history. A few days later, officials held an enormous press conference at the Pentagon. Major General John Samford, Director of Air Force Intelligence, addressed reporters directly. He acknowledged the sightings. He confirmed that unusual radar contacts had occurred, but he argued there was no evidence of hostile aircraft or extraterrestrial visitors. Instead, investigators believed unusual atmospheric conditions, particularly temperature inversions, had likely produced false radar echoes, while bright stars, city lights, and ordinary aircraft contributed to visual confusion. Many meteorologists agreed this explanation was scientifically plausible. Some radar experts accepted it, others remained unconvinced. Even decades later, historians continued debating exactly what happened over Washington that July. The available evidence supports several possibilities. Atmospheric conditions almost certainly influenced radar performance. Witnesses undoubtedly interpreted events through the heightened excitement of the moment. Yet some experienced controllers insisted the targets behaved unlike ordinary false returns. The Washington incidents remain officially unresolved, not because no explanations exist, but because none explains every reported detail with complete certainty. That pattern would repeat itself many times. Another famous investigation began thousands of miles away in eastern England. The year was 1956. Cold War tensions had only intensified. American Air Force units operated from several British bases, standing ready in case conflict erupted with the Soviet Union. One August night, radar operators at Raft Bentwaters detected an unknown target approaching the coast. Its speed varied dramatically. Sometimes it appeared almost stationary. Moments later, it accelerated to extraordinary velocity. Nearby RAF Lakenheath soon detected similar activity. Ground-controlled intercept radar tracked the target while fighter aircraft prepared for interception. Then, something remarkable reportedly occurred. According to military records, one interceptor pilot attempted to approach the object. Instead of continuing on its previous course, the target appeared to turn and pursue the fighter. Radar operators watched the encounter unfold. Eventually, the mysterious contact disappeared. Investigators later studied the incident carefully. Multiple radar systems had detected unusual returns. Several trained military personnel reported visual observations. Weather conditions appeared relatively favorable. Dr. J. Allen Hynek later described the Lakenheath Bentwaters case as one of the strongest in Blue Book's files because it combined experienced witnesses with multiple forms of evidence. Yet, even here, uncertainty remained. Some researchers later suggested unusual atmospheric propagation may have affected radar performance. Others proposed astronomical objects combined with radar anomalies. Neither explanation satisfied everyone. The case remained one of Blue Book's official unknowns. Back in the United States, another mystery unfolded under very different circumstances. The small farming community of Levelland, Texas, had no major military base, no sophisticated radar network, no strategic importance comparable to Washington. It was simply a quiet West Texas town surrounded by open countryside. On the night of November 2, 1957, local police began receiving unusual telephone calls. A truck driver reported a brilliant egg-shaped object sitting across the highway. As he approached, his engine suddenly died. The object rose into the air. Moments later, his truck started normally. Soon another driver called, then another, and another. Within just a few hours, the Levelland Police Department received more than a dozen remarkably similar reports. Witnesses described a glowing object. Vehicle engines stopped functioning nearby. Headlights dimmed or went out. After the object departed, engines restarted without apparent damage. Blue Book investigated. Initially, officials suggested ball lightning or severe thunderstorms might explain the reports. Indeed, storms had passed through the region that evening. Ball lightning remains a poorly understood atmospheric phenomenon capable of producing luminous objects under rare conditions. Yet critics pointed out that numerous independent witnesses described similar experiences over several hours. The engine failures particularly attracted attention. Could atmospheric electricity disable automobile ignition systems? Modern researchers note that older vehicles using conventional ignition systems were sometimes more vulnerable to strong electromagnetic interference than today's electronic systems. Still, no single explanation accounted for every report. Levelland joined the growing collection of intriguing but unresolved cases. Then, there was one of Blue Book's most controversial investigations. It involved not lights, not radar, but photographs. On May 11, 1950, Paul Trent and his wife Evelyn were working on their farm near McMinnville, Oregon. According to their account, Evelyn noticed a strange metallic object moving silently overhead. She called for her husband. Paul grabbed a camera from inside the house and managed to take 2 photographs before the object disappeared into the distance. The images showed what appeared to be a smooth disc-shaped object suspended above the landscape. Unlike many blurry UFO photographs, these pictures were surprisingly clear. Almost immediately, investigators questioned their authenticity. Had the Trents suspended a small model from wires? Was it a hubcap? A mirror? A clever photographic trick? Blue Book examined the images. Independent analysts studied lighting, shadows, perspective, and film characteristics. Over the decades, opinions remained divided. Some experts argued the photographs showed no obvious evidence of manipulation. Others believed a small nearby object could easily create the observed appearance. No definitive proof emerged either way. The McMinnville photographs became famous not because they conclusively proved anything, but because they resisted simple dismissal. Years later, they would still appear in books and documentaries discussing the history of UFO investigations. By now, Blue Book investigators had begun recognizing an important truth. The strongest cases rarely involved spectacular claims. Instead, they often consisted of small details accumulating into larger puzzles. Multiple witnesses who did not know one another, independent radar contacts, consistent timelines, professional observers, physical traces that seemed ordinary until examined together. Any single piece of evidence might have an innocent explanation. The challenge came when several pieces appeared simultaneously. This frustrated skeptics and believers alike. Believers often asked why the government could not simply admit these cases demonstrated something extraordinary. Skeptics responded that unexplained does not automatically mean impossible or extraterrestrial. Blue Book itself occupied an uncomfortable position between those extremes. Investigators understood something the public often overlooked. Every mystery exists within the limits of available information. A perfect explanation requires perfect evidence. Real investigations almost never receive perfect evidence. Witnesses forget. Photographs blur. Radar tapes are erased. Weather changes. Physical traces disappear. Time steadily erodes certainty. One case illustrated that reality better than almost any other. In April 1964, police officer Lonnie Zamora was chasing a speeding vehicle through the streets of Socorro, New Mexico, when he heard a loud roar and noticed a blue-orange flame descending toward the desert outside town. Thinking a vehicle might have exploded, Zamora drove toward the area. Instead, he reported seeing a shiny egg-shaped craft resting on four landing legs. Nearby stood two small figures dressed in white coveralls. As Zamora approached, the figures appeared startled. Moments later, the object rose into the air with a deafening roar, leaving scorch marks and disturbed vegetation behind. Unlike many sensational reports, Zamora had an excellent reputation. He was regarded as honest, calm, and reliable. Blue Book investigators treated the case with unusual seriousness. Physical traces were documented. Witness interviews were extensive. Dr. Hynek personally considered it one of the most compelling investigations of his career. Could it have been an experimental lunar landing vehicle from nearby White Sands Missile Range? A secret military test? An elaborate hoax? No evidence conclusively supported any explanation. Socorro remained officially unidentified. Cases like these had an unexpected effect on Blue Book personnel. They did not necessarily convince investigators that extraordinary visitors were crossing American skies. Instead, they taught a quieter lesson: nature, technology, human perception, and government secrecy all possess the ability to create mysteries far more stubborn than anyone expects. Sometimes the answer is eventually discovered. Sometimes it remains forever, just beyond reach. And for one man working closely with Blue Book, that realization would change the course of his entire career. The astronomer who had been hired to explain away flying saucers was beginning to ask whether the Air Force had been asking the wrong questions all along. Every great mystery has a character whose journey mirrors the audience's own, someone who begins with certainty, someone who believes they already know the answer. And then, piece by piece, experience forces them to reconsider. For Project Blue Book, That person was not a pilot who claimed to see a flying saucer. It was an astronomer hired to explain why no flying saucers existed. His name was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. Few people could have seemed less likely to become associated with UFOs. Hynek was a respected scientist trained in astronomy and astrophysics. He taught at universities, studied the stars with mathematical precision, and believed deeply in the scientific method. His career depended on evidence, not speculation. He was far more interested in calculating the movement of distant galaxies than discussing mysterious lights reported by excited eyewitnesses. When the Air Force first approached him in the late 1940s, he accepted for a simple reason. He assumed the work would be straightforward. Most reports, he believed, would have perfectly ordinary explanations. People would mistake Venus for a strange object. A meteor would streak across the sky. Clouds would reflect city lights. Pilots would occasionally misjudge distance or speed. A scientist could calmly explain these misunderstandings, and the mystery would slowly disappear. In many cases, that is exactly what happened. One after another, Hynek identified astronomical objects that witnesses had misinterpreted. Bright planets, stars near the horizon, meteor showers, the moon seen through unusual atmospheric conditions. He saved investigators countless hours by showing that many supposed UFO sightings were simply natural phenomena viewed under unfamiliar circumstances. The Air Force valued his expertise. He became one of the project's most trusted consultants. But science has an interesting habit. When practiced honestly, it rarely rewards certainty. Instead, it rewards curiosity. And curiosity slowly began changing Hynek. The transformation did not happen overnight. There was no single case that suddenly convinced him something extraordinary was happening. Instead, the change came through repetition. Again and again, he met witnesses who did not fit the stereotypes many people imagined. They were not attention seekers. They were not obvious pranksters. Many were almost embarrassed to report what they had seen. Some worried their careers would suffer. Military pilots feared ridicule from fellow officers. Commercial airline captains risked being viewed as unreliable. Police officers hesitated to tell colleagues about experiences they could not explain. Scientists were particularly cautious. For people whose reputations depended on careful observation, admitting uncertainty could be deeply uncomfortable. Hynek noticed something important. Many witnesses did not claim to know what they had seen. They simply insisted they had seen something. That distinction mattered. Science begins not with answers, but with observations. A person who says, "I saw an alien spacecraft," is making a conclusion. A person who says, "I observed an object I cannot identify," is reporting a fact about their own experience. Hynek believed investigators sometimes confused the two. He became increasingly frustrated when witnesses were dismissed without serious consideration simply because their reports sounded unusual. He often reminded colleagues that extraordinary reports deserved careful investigation, not immediate belief, but not immediate ridicule either. One incident left a particularly strong impression. In the mid-1950s, a military pilot submitted a detailed report describing an object that appeared to maneuver in ways unlike conventional aircraft. The pilot was highly experienced. Weather conditions were good. The description was precise. Hynek expected investigators to analyze the report carefully. Instead, it was quickly attributed to a probable astronomical object. When Hynek reviewed the evidence himself, he realized the explanation did not fit. The object's reported motion, timing, and direction made the proposed solution extremely unlikely. He was disturbed. Not because he believed the report proved extraterrestrial activity, because he believed science had failed. A weak explanation, in his view, was worse than admitting uncertainty. This became one of the defining principles of his career. It is perfectly acceptable to say, "We do not yet know." Pretending certainty where none exists only weakens scientific credibility. As the years passed, Hynek found himself occupying an increasingly uncomfortable position. To UFO enthusiasts, he remained too skeptical. He repeatedly emphasized that most reports had ordinary explanations. He rejected sensational claims unsupported by evidence. He criticized hoaxes and unreliable witnesses. To some Air Force officials, however, he became too open-minded. He argued that unresolved cases deserved additional research rather than quick dismissal. He believed investigators should follow the evidence wherever it led, even if the answer remained unknown. Standing between two opposing worlds was not easy. Neither side was fully satisfied. Hynek later admitted that his own thinking evolved in stages. At first, he saw UFO reports primarily as astronomical misunderstandings. Then he began viewing them as a fascinating problem in human perception. Eventually, he concluded that a small percentage represented genuinely unexplained phenomena worthy of scientific study. Notice what changed. Not his standards, his questions. He was no longer asking, "How do we explain this away?" He was asking, "What actually happened here?" That shift may sound subtle. In science, it is profound. Meanwhile, Project Blue Book continued receiving thousands of reports. Hynek examined as many important cases as possible. Certain patterns caught his attention. Many sightings occurred at night, when judging distance becomes difficult. Others involved bright lights rather than clearly defined objects. Some witnesses described silent hovering. Others reported incredible speeds. No single explanation fit everything. If UFOs represented one phenomenon, why were the reports so varied? If they represented many different phenomena, how could investigators separate them? Hynek believed the first step was organization. He began grouping sightings according to observable characteristics rather than assumed causes. Simple nighttime lights formed one category. Objects seen during daylight became another. Radar-related incidents required separate treatment. Cases involving alleged physical traces deserved their own attention. Years later, this work evolved into what became known as the Hynek classification system. The categories are still widely recognized today. Nocturnal lights, daylight disks, radar visual cases, close encounters. The phrase close encounter eventually entered popular culture through books and films, but Hynek originally introduced it as a neutral scientific classification. He wanted investigators to describe observations consistently without jumping to conclusions. If researchers around the world used the same terminology, comparing cases would become much easier. This reflected Hynek's broader philosophy. Good science depends on careful language. Words shape thought. If investigators assume an object is an alien spacecraft before examining evidence, bias enters the investigation. If they assume every witness is mistaken before asking questions, bias enters as well. Neutral descriptions create room for discovery. Hynek also became fascinated by the sociology of UFO reports. Why did certain waves of sightings appear during particular years? Why did reports often surge after major newspaper stories? Why were some regions far more active than others? The answers, he realized, probably involved multiple factors. Public attention influenced reporting. Cold War anxiety heightened vigilance. New aviation technology created unfamiliar sights. Psychological expectations shaped interpretation. None of these explanations necessarily ruled out every mystery. Instead, they formed part of a much larger picture. Human beings never observe the world in isolation. Culture influences perception. History influences memory. Fear influences judgment. Understanding UFO reports, therefore, required understanding people. This perspective distinguished Hynek from many others involved in the debate. He recognized that even reports with ordinary explanations could teach valuable lessons about psychology, communication, and scientific investigation. Then came one of the most difficult periods of his career. By the 1960s, criticism of Project Blue Book was growing from multiple directions. UFO organizations accused the Air Force of concealing evidence. Scientists criticized the quality of some investigations. Journalists questioned whether the project had become more concerned with public relations than genuine research. Hynek increasingly shared some of those concerns. He believed Blue Book suffered from limited funding, insufficient personnel, and growing institutional pressure to close cases quickly. Imagine trying to investigate thousands of reports each year with only a small staff and limited resources. Some investigations inevitably became superficial. Hynek did not accuse colleagues of dishonesty. Most were hard-working officers doing the best they could under difficult circumstances. His criticism focused on the system itself. Science requires time. Good investigations require patience. Blue Book often had too little of either. The turning point came after the famous swamp gas incident in Michigan during 1966. Residents reported strange glowing objects over marshland near Dexter and Hillsdale. The sightings attracted enormous media attention. Hynek visited personally. After examining conditions, he suggested that some observations might have been caused by combustible gases naturally produced in swampy areas under certain atmospheric conditions. Scientifically, the explanation had merit. Publicly, it became a disaster. Newspapers mocked the idea. Politicians ridiculed it. Many witnesses felt insulted. The phrase swamp gas entered American culture as shorthand for an implausible government explanation. Hynek himself later acknowledged that although swamp gas may have contributed to some observations, his comments were presented far more broadly than intended. The experience taught him another lesson. Communication matters as much as investigation. People lose trust when they believe officials dismiss their experiences without genuine consideration. Whether those experiences ultimately have ordinary explanations is almost secondary. Respectful investigation builds confidence. Dismissiveness destroys it. As the decade progressed, Hynek's relationship with Blue Book continued changing. He remained committed to scientific skepticism. He still rejected unsupported claims. But he also became convinced that the phenomenon, whatever its ultimate explanation, deserved serious academic research beyond the limited framework of military intelligence. Eventually, after Project Blue Book ended, he founded the Center for UFO Studies. Its purpose was not to prove extraterrestrial visitation. It was to encourage careful scientific investigation free from both sensationalism and institutional pressure. Looking back today, Hynek's greatest contribution may have had little to do with UFOs themselves. Instead, he demonstrated something much broader. Real skepticism is not cynicism. A cynic dismisses unfamiliar ideas without investigation. A true skeptic asks difficult questions of every claim, including conventional explanations. Hynek never stopped demanding evidence. He simply became unwilling to pretend that evidence existed when it did not. That attitude earned him criticism from nearly everyone. Believers thought he remained too cautious. Skeptics thought he had become too sympathetic. Perhaps that was inevitable. The most honest position in a genuine mystery is often the least satisfying. It admits uncertainty, and uncertainty rarely makes headlines. Yet while Hynek wrestled with scientific questions inside Blue Book, another story was unfolding elsewhere in America. Far above ordinary commercial air traffic, hidden from public view. Aircraft, unlike anything the world had ever seen, were slicing through the upper atmosphere. Few Americans knew they existed. Many Blue Book investigators didn't know either. Ironically, some of the UFO reports they struggled hardest to explain were being created not by visitors from another world, but by some of the United States' own most closely guarded military secrets. The Cold War was a world filled with urgency, but for just a moment, we can step away from it. Imagine the stillness of a desert night, where the wind moves softly across the sand and the stars shine with remarkable clarity. Out there, far from busy cities and distant politics, the sky feels timeless, whether every mystery has an answer or not. The universe has always rewarded those willing to pause, look upward, and quietly wonder. If you had stood in the Nevada desert on a quiet morning during the mid-1950s and looked toward the horizon, you might have seen something that no ordinary American was supposed to witness. High above the mountains, far beyond the altitude of commercial airliners, a long silver aircraft drifted silently across the sky. It had impossibly long wings. It left almost no visible trail. It seemed to move too slowly for a jet and too high for any airplane that was supposed to exist. If you reported it, your neighbors might have laughed. If you reported it to the Air Force, your sighting could have landed on the desk of Project Blue Book. The strange part is that even the investigators examining your report might not have known what you had actually seen. Because the aircraft was real. It simply did not officially exist. This was one of the greatest ironies at the heart of Project Blue Book. While investigators searched for answers to unexplained sightings, the United States government was simultaneously creating some of the most advanced flying machines ever built and hiding them behind walls of extraordinary secrecy. To understand why, you have to step back into the atmosphere of the Cold War. The world after World War II was divided into two armed camps. On one side stood the United States and its allies. On the other stood the Soviet Union and the Communist bloc. Both possessed nuclear weapons. Both feared a surprise attack. Both desperately wanted to know what the other was building. Information became as valuable as bombs. The country that knew more about its enemy would hold a decisive advantage. But gathering that information was becoming increasingly difficult. The Soviet Union was enormous. Its borders were tightly controlled. Foreign journalists were watched carefully. Traditional espionage carried enormous risks. American leaders needed another way to look inside the Soviet Union. The answer came from the sky. The Central Intelligence Agency, working with the Air Force and private industry, approved the development of a revolutionary reconnaissance aircraft. The project was led by the brilliant aircraft designer Clarence Kelly Johnson and his legendary engineering team at Lockheed's Skunk Works. Johnson already had a reputation for accomplishing what others considered impossible. His engineers worked in isolated facilities, protected by intense secrecy and astonishing deadlines. Their philosophy was simple: build the airplane first, explain it later. The aircraft they created became known as the U-2. At first glance, it hardly looked like a military airplane. Its wings stretched more than 100 feet from tip to tip, giving it the appearance of an oversized glider. The enormous wings allowed it to climb above 70,000 feet, far higher than commercial airliners or Soviet fighter aircraft could reach at the time. From that incredible altitude, cameras aboard the U-2 photographed military bases, missile sites, factories, and airfields across thousands of miles. The information it gathered transformed American intelligence. But secrecy created an unexpected problem. Pilots flying ordinary airliners had never seen an aircraft operating so high above them. Ground observers had no reason to believe such airplanes existed. Even experienced military personnel often lacked the security clearance necessary to know about the program. When sunlight struck the U-2's polished wings shortly after sunset, something remarkable happened. People on the ground could still see the aircraft glowing brightly even though night had already fallen below. To an observer standing in darkness, the object appeared as a brilliant silver light floating silently across the heavens. No ordinary airplane behaved that way. Thousands of Americans looked upward and wondered what they had just witnessed. Many reported UFOs. The CIA later estimated that the U-2 alone accounted for a significant percentage of unexplained sightings during the late 1950s. Not because people were irrational, because they lacked crucial information. Imagine seeing something that truly does not fit your understanding of the world. You naturally search for explanations. Without knowing secret reconnaissance aircraft existed, witnesses proposed the best explanations available to them. Flying saucers, experimental aircraft, unknown visitors. They were trying to solve a puzzle while missing several pieces. Blue Book investigators faced the same challenge. Many did not possess the security clearances required to access details of highly classified reconnaissance programs. Even when they suspected secret technology might explain a report, they could not always confirm it. National security took priority over solving UFO mysteries. This created a remarkable situation. One branch of the government investigated reports. Another branch quietly created many of those reports. Neither could always tell the other the full story. The pattern repeated itself throughout the Cold War. As Soviet air defenses improved, the United States needed something even more advanced than the U-2. Once again, Kelly Johnson's engineers received an extraordinary challenge: design an aircraft capable of flying higher, faster, far faster. The result became one of the most extraordinary airplanes ever built, the A-12 Ox Cart. Its public descendant, the SR-71 Blackbird, would later become famous around the world. But during development, the A-12 remained one of America's deepest secrets. Constructed largely from titanium because ordinary aluminum would melt under the heat generated by extreme speed, the aircraft cruised above Mach 3, more than 3 times the speed of sound. Pilots described watching the curvature of Earth become visible from the cockpit. At those speeds, the airplane crossed entire states in minutes. Imagine standing on a lonely highway in Nevada. You hear a sudden sonic boom. Looking upward, you catch only the briefest glimpse of a dark object already disappearing into the distance. How would you describe what you had seen? Most people had no reference point. Aircraft simply were not supposed to move that fast. Reports poured in. Blue Book continued receiving descriptions of impossible speeds, silent flight, unusual shapes, and extraordinary altitudes. Some undoubtedly involved ordinary misidentifications, others likely involved aircraft whose existence remained officially denied. The mystery extended beyond airplanes. The Cold War also transformed missile technology. Test ranges stretched across deserts and oceans. Experimental rockets climbed toward space. Some exploded spectacularly. Others left glowing trails unlike anything most Americans had ever witnessed. Early ballistic missile tests often occurred at dawn or dusk when upper atmospheric conditions produced dazzling visual effects. Sunlight reflecting from rocket exhaust high above Earth created enormous luminous clouds visible hundreds of miles away. Entire cities occasionally watched strange glowing formations drifting silently across the twilight sky. Telephone calls flooded local police departments. Radio stations interrupted broadcasts. Once again, people reported unidentified flying objects. Today, many of these events can be reconstructed using declassified launch records. At the time, however, officials frequently remained silent. Acknowledging the launches might reveal classified capabilities to Soviet intelligence. The public received few explanations. Speculation filled the gap. Nowhere was this combination of secrecy and speculation more powerful than in southern Nevada. In the early 1950s, the U.S. government established a remote testing facility beside a dry lake bed known as Groom Lake. Official maps revealed almost nothing. Civilian access was prohibited. Employees often traveled on unmarked aircraft. Buildings appeared where previously there had been only desert. The location would eventually become known around the world by a simple name: Area 51. Today, the words immediately evoke images of alien spacecraft and hidden laboratories. But the real history is both more ordinary and in many ways more fascinating. Area 51 existed because the surrounding landscape offered unique advantages. The isolated desert reduced the risk of accidental observation. Clear weather allowed year-round flight testing. The vast open space provided room for experimental aircraft operating at the limits of known technology. Over the decades, engineers tested reconnaissance planes, stealth prototypes, radar systems, drones, and countless other projects whose details often remained classified for years. People living near the region occasionally observed unusual lights, strange aircraft, objects producing unfamiliar sounds. Some sightings undoubtedly involved genuine military technology. Others almost certainly resulted from misinterpretation and rumor. The two became impossible to separate. Area 51 developed a mythology almost as secretive as its actual mission. Ironically, the myths sometimes benefited the government. If citizens believed mysterious lights represented extraterrestrial visitors, they might pay less attention to real aircraft programs. There is little evidence that officials deliberately invented alien stories, but they rarely rushed to discourage speculation when it helped protect classified projects. Silence can become a surprisingly effective form of camouflage. Even pilots occasionally became part of the confusion. Military aviators flying routine patrols sometimes encountered unfamiliar aircraft without knowing they were participating in the same country's secret programs. Security compartments were so strict that information flowed only to those who absolutely needed it. One squadron might know almost nothing about another's classified mission. Blue Book investigators therefore occupied a uniquely difficult position. Their official mission required identifying unknown aerial objects, yet some objects remained officially unknown by design. How do you solve a puzzle when key evidence has been intentionally removed? The answer is that sometimes you cannot. This reality complicated Blue Book's public reputation. Critics argued the Air Force was hiding the truth. In some cases, they were partially correct. Not because officials concealed extraterrestrial spacecraft, because they concealed advanced American technology. The distinction mattered enormously. But from the public's perspective, secrecy looked like secrecy. If the government refused to explain what witnesses had seen, people naturally wondered why. Trust gradually eroded. This erosion became even more significant during the 1960s. The Vietnam War created growing skepticism toward official government statements. The Pentagon Papers would later reveal that administrations had sometimes presented incomplete or misleading information to the public. Then came Watergate. Confidence in government institutions declined sharply. Against this backdrop, older UFO cases acquired new life. People revisited incidents from the 1950s and asked a different question. If officials had hidden information in other areas, could they also have hidden information about UFOs? The answer depended on what one meant by hidden information. Yes, classified aircraft had generated genuine confusion. Yes, secret intelligence programs influenced many investigations. Yes, some explanations given to the public were intentionally incomplete because revealing the full truth would compromise national security. But those facts did not automatically validate every extraordinary claim. Instead, they revealed something subtler. Real secrets often produce imaginary ones. Once people discover that one part of an official story was incomplete, they may begin questioning every official statement. Psychologists call this a form of generalization. One confirmed deception increases suspicion elsewhere. The Cold War created fertile ground for exactly this process. Government secrecy was real. Espionage was real. Hidden technology was real. Experimental aircraft were real. Against that backdrop, separating documented facts from speculation became increasingly difficult. For Project Blue Book, this was perhaps the greatest challenge of all. The project existed at the intersection of two worlds. One was filled with genuine scientific mysteries, mistaken observations, and honest witnesses struggling to describe unfamiliar experiences. The other was populated by classified aircraft, covert intelligence operations, and military programs that officially did not exist. Sometimes those worlds collided. When they did, neither investigators nor the public possessed enough information to understand the full picture. Yet even as secret technology explained many reports, another force was shaping the UFO phenomenon in ways no military investigation could ever control. Not the Air Force, not the CIA, not even the witnesses themselves. It was Hollywood. Movies, television, magazines, and popular culture were about to transform flying saucers from a Cold War mystery into one of the most enduring myths of modern America. By the late 1950s, Project Blue Book had become something unexpected. It was no longer just a military investigation. It had become part of American culture. The reports arriving at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base did not exist in isolation anymore. Every witness, every investigator, every journalist, and every reader was influencing everyone else. The mystery had escaped the filing cabinets of the Air Force and entered movie theaters, bookstores, television screens, toy stores, comic books, and family dinner conversations. From that moment forward, UFOs would no longer belong only to scientists or military intelligence. They would belong to popular imagination. And once an idea becomes part of culture, it begins to evolve in ways that no government can control. To understand how this happened, you have to remember what America looked like during the 1950s. On the surface, it was an era of remarkable optimism. Millions of returning veterans bought homes in growing suburbs, new highways connected cities across the country, televisions became common household items. Families gathered around dinner tables while children dreamed of becoming pilots, astronauts, or scientists. The American economy was booming. Factories that had produced bombers and tanks during World War II were now building refrigerators, automobiles, and televisions. Middle-class families enjoyed a standard of living that much of the world could only imagine. Yet beneath that optimism was constant anxiety. The Cold War touched nearly every aspect of daily life. School children practiced duck and cover drills in case of nuclear attack. Families built backyard fallout shelters. Cities installed air raid sirens. Maps showed Soviet bombers flying across the Arctic toward North America. Newspapers regularly discussed atomic weapons capable of destroying entire cities. For the first time in history, ordinary people understood that civilization itself could disappear in a single afternoon. Fear became part of everyday life. And fear has always fueled imagination. When people live through uncertain times, they naturally search for explanations. Some fears become political. Some become religious, others become stories. Hollywood recognized this almost immediately. In 1951, movie audiences watched The Day the Earth Stood Still, the story of a mysterious visitor arriving from another world with a warning for humanity. Unlike many later alien films, the visitor was not a monster. He was calm, intelligent, concerned that human beings might destroy themselves through war. The message reflected the age. The greatest danger did not come from outer space. It came from Earth's own nuclear arsenals. Audiences embraced the film because it captured something deeper than entertainment. It expressed the hopes and fears of an entire generation. Could a more advanced civilization prevent humanity from making a terrible mistake? Or were we destined to destroy ourselves? Just 2 years later came The War of the Worlds, based on H.G. Wells' famous novel. This time, aliens arrived not as peaceful observers but as unstoppable invaders. Cities burned. Military forces failed. Human civilization appeared helpless. Again, the story mirrored Cold War fears. The enemy seemed technologically superior. Conventional weapons proved ineffective. Survival itself became uncertain. Although audiences knew they were watching fiction, the emotional themes felt remarkably real. The same nation building hydrogen bombs was also imagining extraterrestrial invasions. Science fiction became a safe way to discuss fears that were otherwise difficult to express. The pattern repeated again and again. Flying saucers appeared in comic books. Alien visitors arrived in radio dramas. Magazine covers showed gleaming discs hovering over famous landmarks. Children played with toy spaceships. Halloween costumes featured creatures from distant planets. The unknown became familiar. Ironically, the more familiar UFOs became in popular culture, the more complicated real investigations grew. Imagine being a police officer in 1958. A nervous citizen reports seeing a glowing object above a field. Have they described exactly what they observed, or have they unconsciously borrowed images from the latest science fiction movie? Human memory does not work like a video camera. We remember experiences by combining observation with expectation. Psychologists later demonstrated how surprisingly easy it is for cultural influences to shape eyewitness testimony. People rarely invent memories intentionally. Instead, the brain naturally organizes unfamiliar experiences using familiar ideas. The flying saucer became one of those familiar ideas. Project Blue Book investigators gradually recognized this problem. Every major newspaper story produced new waves of reports. A famous sighting received national attention. Days later, similar sightings appeared across the country. Some undoubtedly involved genuine observations, others reflected increased public awareness. People simply looked upward more often after reading dramatic headlines. The media had become part of the phenomenon itself. Television accelerated the process. During the 1950s, television ownership exploded across the United States. Families who had once relied on newspapers and radio could now watch dramatic stories unfold inside their living rooms. News footage brought military press conferences directly into American homes. Interviews with witnesses became evening entertainment. Programs discussing mysterious phenomena attracted impressive audiences. Unlike newspapers, television added emotion. Viewers could see nervous witnesses describing extraordinary experiences. They could hear uncertainty in investigators' voices. Mystery became visual, and visual stories are often remembered longer than written ones. The entertainment industry noticed something else. People loved unanswered questions. A detective story remains interesting only until the criminal is identified. A mystery with no obvious solution can last for generations. Flying saucers offered the perfect narrative. They combined science, adventure, fear, wonder, national security, and the possibility that humanity might not be alone in the universe. No screenwriter could ask for richer material. Books soon joined the conversation. Some authors argued that governments were concealing astonishing discoveries. Others attempted careful investigations of eyewitness accounts. A few mixed genuine research with imaginative speculation, making it difficult for readers to distinguish documented history from personal belief. The publishing industry had discovered an eager audience. Every new book promised another secret, another hidden truth, another explanation that official investigations supposedly ignored. This commercial success produced an unintended consequence. Extraordinary claims sold better than ordinary explanations. A headline reading "Venus mistaken for UFO" rarely attracted much attention. A headline suggesting government hides flying saucer secrets sold newspapers and books. Economic incentives quietly shaped public discussion. Media organizations competed for readers. Television networks competed for viewers. Publishers competed for bestseller lists. Mystery became profitable. That does not mean journalists deliberately fabricated stories. Many worked diligently to verify facts. But editors naturally favored stories that captured public interest. Human curiosity has always been valuable. The UFO phenomenon simply demonstrated how valuable it could become. Another cultural change was unfolding at the same time. The space age had begun. In October 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the world's first artificial satellite. For Americans, the news came as a profound shock. A small metal sphere, no larger than a beach ball, was now circling Earth every 96 minutes. People stepped outside at night, hoping to glimpse the tiny satellite crossing the stars. For the first time, ordinary citizens understood that human-made objects could travel through space. The impossible had become real. Only a decade earlier, rockets capable of reaching orbit had belonged almost entirely to science fiction. Now they appeared in newspaper photographs. This changed how people thought about extraterrestrial life. If humans could reach space, perhaps other civilizations had mastered interstellar travel. The idea no longer seemed entirely absurd. Scientific discoveries reinforced that optimism. Astronomers identified countless new galaxies. Radio telescopes searched for signals from distant stars. Scientists debated the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe. The famous Drake equation, proposed in 1961, attempted to estimate how many intelligent civilizations might exist within the Milky Way. Importantly, mainstream science distinguished between two separate questions. Is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe possible? Almost certainly. Has it visited Earth? Evidence remained far less convincing. Public discussion often blurred the difference. Many people assumed belief in extraterrestrial life automatically implied belief in UFO visitation. Scientists repeatedly emphasized that these were completely separate issues. The universe is unimaginably vast. Life elsewhere could exist without ever reaching Earth. Nevertheless, the two ideas became increasingly linked in popular culture. By the 1960s, the image of the alien itself had begun changing. Early science fiction often portrayed extraterrestrials as monstrous invaders. Gradually, another image emerged: small beings, large heads, enormous black eyes, thin bodies. This appearance became so familiar that many people today assume it has always represented alien life. In reality, the image developed gradually through decades of books, films, television, reported encounters, and artistic interpretation. Culture was creating its own visual language. One generation influenced the next. Children who watched science fiction movies became adults describing mysterious experiences. Artists illustrating books influenced later witnesses' expectations. Hollywood and eyewitness reports evolved together. Meanwhile, Project Blue Book found itself caught in an impossible position. If investigators dismissed reports, critics accused them of participating in a cover-up. If they admitted uncertainty, newspapers often presented uncertainty as evidence of hidden knowledge. The project could satisfy neither believers nor skeptics. The Air Force's own public relations strategy sometimes made matters worse. Officials understandably wanted to reassure citizens, but reassurance occasionally sounded dismissive. Witnesses who sincerely believed they had experienced something extraordinary felt ignored. Once trust weakened, every future statement became more difficult to accept. The gap between official explanations and public belief widened steadily throughout the 1960s. Interestingly, this growing fascination with UFOs reflected something deeply American. The United States has always celebrated exploration, from pioneers crossing the continent to aviators breaking speed records and astronauts preparing for the moon. American history is filled with people pushing beyond known boundaries. The frontier has always occupied a special place in the national imagination. As the physical frontier disappeared, space became the new frontier. Flying saucers represented the ultimate unknown territory, not merely another country, another world. Perhaps that helps explain why UFO stories resonated so powerfully. They combined America's love of exploration with its Cold War anxieties and technological optimism. They asked timeless questions in a modern setting. What lies beyond the horizon? Who else might be out there? What happens when humanity encounters something completely unfamiliar? These questions are far older than the 20th century. Project Blue Book simply inherited them during an era when radar, rockets, nuclear weapons, and television transformed ancient curiosity into modern mystery. By the end of the 1960s, however, enthusiasm inside the Air Force was fading. Thousands of investigations had consumed years of effort. Budgets tightened. Criticism intensified. Many officials concluded that Project Blue Book had reached the end of its usefulness. Yet ending the investigation would prove much easier than ending the debate. Because once a mystery becomes part of culture, closing the file rarely closes the story. In fact, for millions of Americans, the official end of Project Blue Book would become the beginning of an even larger question. If the government had stopped looking, who would continue searching for answers? Before we reach the end of this remarkable story, take one more slow journey into the night sky. Imagine lying beneath a blanket of stars somewhere in the American countryside, where only the gentle sounds of nature interrupt the silence. The questions we've explored tonight have fascinated generations, but there is no need to solve every mystery before you drift off to sleep. Sometimes, simply wondering is enough, and tomorrow the stars will still be there, waiting patiently above. By the late 1960s, Project Blue Book had reached a crossroads. For nearly 20 years, investigators had examined reports from every corner of the United States. They had interviewed thousands of witnesses, analyzed radar records, consulted astronomers, questioned military pilots, reviewed photographs, and filled filing cabinets with more than 12,000 case files. It had become one of the longest-running official investigations of unexplained aerial phenomena in history. Yet after all those years, the Air Force still faced the same question it had confronted in 1947. Should the investigation continue? From one perspective, Blue Book had achieved remarkable success. The overwhelming majority of reported sightings had been identified. Bright planets, weather balloons, aircraft, experimental military technology, meteorological phenomena, optical illusions, human error. Investigators had demonstrated that ordinary explanations accounted for most reports, but another fact proved much harder to ignore. Hundreds of cases still remained officially unexplained. They were not necessarily extraordinary. They were simply unresolved. and that distinction would become the center of one of the project's greatest controversies. Many critics argued that if even a small percentage of cases remained unidentified after careful investigation, the Air Force should expand its research. Instead, the opposite happened. The government began looking for a way to end it. To understand why, it helps to remember what America looked like in the late 1960s. The country had changed dramatically since Kenneth Arnold first reported strange objects over Mount Rainier. The optimism of the post-war years had faded. The Vietnam War dominated headlines. College campuses erupted in protests. The civil rights movement transformed American society. Political assassinations shocked the nation. Confidence in public institutions was beginning to erode. The Air Force faced enormous demands on its budget and personnel. Military leaders increasingly questioned whether Blue Book justified the resources it consumed. From their perspective, nearly 2 decades of investigations had produced no evidence that UFOs threatened national security. No confirmed hostile aircraft. No recovered extraterrestrial technology. No proof that unknown objects represented a military danger. If the project's primary purpose was protecting American airspace, many officials believed it had already answered the question. But not everyone agreed. Among Blue Book's critics were scientists who believed the investigations themselves often lacked sufficient depth. One of the loudest voices belonged to Dr. James McDonald, a respected atmospheric physicist from the University of Arizona. Unlike many UFO enthusiasts, McDonald approached the subject as a scientist. He did not claim alien spacecraft had been proven. Instead, he argued that some reports deserved far more rigorous investigation than they had received. He personally interviewed witnesses, reviewed case files, studied weather data, examined radar reports. Again and again, he concluded that a small number of incidents remained genuinely puzzling. McDonald criticized Blue Book for what he believed was an institutional tendency to favor conventional explanations even when evidence remained incomplete. His arguments attracted attention within the scientific community. At the same time, members of Congress began asking uncomfortable questions. If the government insisted there was nothing significant to investigate, why had it spent nearly 20 years investigating in the first place? Public hearings were proposed. The Air Force realized it needed an independent scientific assessment. Rather than evaluating individual UFO reports itself, the government turned to academia. The University of Colorado accepted the assignment. Leading the study was physicist Edward Condon. The resulting investigation became known simply as the Condon Committee. Its mission sounded straightforward. Review available evidence. Study selected cases. Determine whether further scientific investigation of UFOs was likely to produce meaningful discoveries. From the beginning, expectations were enormous. Supporters hoped an independent university study would finally settle decades of controversy. Skeptics expected confirmation that UFOs lacked scientific importance. Believers hoped respected scientists might validate at least some extraordinary cases. No matter what conclusion emerged, someone would almost certainly be disappointed. The committee spent 2 years examining reports, interviewing witnesses, and reviewing Blue Book files. Not every member agreed with every conclusion. Internal disagreements occasionally surfaced. Some researchers believed certain cases remained difficult to explain. Others argued that unexplained cases reflected insufficient evidence rather than unknown phenomena. Science often works that way. Consensus is rarely immediate. Debate is part of the process. Finally, in 1968, the committee published its findings. The report stretched to nearly 1,000 pages. Its technical analyses covered astronomy, psychology, radar, photography, meteorology, and eyewitness testimony. Many individual cases received thoughtful examination. Yet the public remembered only one conclusion. Edward Condon wrote that further extensive study of UFOs probably could not be justified by the expectation that science would advance significantly as a result. Those words carried enormous weight. The Air Force interpreted them as confirmation that Project Blue Book had accomplished everything reasonably possible. Many scientists agreed, others sharply criticized the conclusion. Some committee members themselves later suggested the final summary did not fully reflect the diversity of evidence contained within the report. Critics pointed out an interesting contradiction. Several chapters described genuinely unexplained cases, yet the overall recommendation argued against continued investigation. How could both statements be true? The answer lies in understanding scientific priorities. Science investigates countless unsolved problems. Not every unanswered question receives unlimited resources. Condon argued that the available evidence suggested future investigations were unlikely to produce breakthroughs proportional to their cost. That did not necessarily mean every case had been solved. It meant he doubted additional research would significantly change the broader picture. Whether one agrees with that judgment remains a matter of debate even today. The Air Force, however, had reached its decision. On December 17, 1969, officials announced that Project Blue Book would officially close. After nearly 2 decades, America's formal investigation into unidentified flying objects had come to an end. The Air Force summarized its conclusions in 3 points. First, no UFO reported to or investigated by the Air Force had ever indicated a threat to national security. Second, there was no evidence that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technological developments beyond modern scientific knowledge. Third, no evidence suggested the investigated objects were extraterrestrial vehicles. Those statements sounded definitive. For government officials, the matter appeared settled. The project closed its doors. Personnel moved to other assignments. Case files entered the National Archives. The investigation was over. Or so it seemed. Almost immediately, critics challenged the decision. Some argued that Blue Book had never received adequate funding. Others claimed investigators had been pressured to minimize unexplained cases. Still, others believed classified military programs continued behind the scenes under different names. Conspiracy theories flourished. Ironically, closing Blue Book may have intensified public suspicion rather than reducing it. Human psychology often works that way. When a long-running investigation suddenly ends without providing complete certainty, many people wonder whether the real story remains hidden. For believers, closure looked suspicious. For skeptics, it represented bureaucratic efficiency. The same event produced entirely different interpretations. Dr. J. Allen Hynek found himself in a particularly complicated position. Although he accepted many of Blue Book's conclusions, he disagreed with ending serious scientific research altogether. He believed the Air Force had fulfilled its military mission. But he also believed some unexplained cases still deserved careful academic investigation. Hynek worried that closing Blue Book might create the false impression that every important question had already been answered. Instead of abandoning the subject, he proposed removing it from military intelligence and placing it within mainstream scientific research. That transition never fully occurred. Universities showed little interest. Funding remained scarce. Many scientists feared professional ridicule if they became associated with UFO research. As a result, the field gradually shifted away from established academic institutions. Independent researchers, civilian organizations, journalists, and private investigators increasingly filled the gap left by Blue Book. Some conducted thoughtful, evidence-based work, others embraced increasingly speculative theories. Without a central official investigation, standards varied enormously. Meanwhile, another development quietly reshaped public opinion. During the 1970s and 1980s, the U.S. government began declassifying numerous Cold War documents. Historians gained access to records describing the U-2, the A-12 Oxcart, reconnaissance satellites, missile programs, and other once-secret technologies. Many older UFO reports suddenly made far more sense. Witnesses had indeed observed extraordinary aircraft. They simply belonged to the United States. The CIA later acknowledged that high-altitude reconnaissance flights likely accounted for many sightings during the 1950s. For skeptics, these revelations strengthened conventional explanations. For believers, they demonstrated something different. The government really had hidden important information. Even if the secrets involved spy planes rather than alien spacecraft, public trust had already been damaged. The lesson many people learned was simple. Official explanations sometimes change. Once that realization takes hold, skepticism toward future statements becomes almost inevitable. Roswell provides perhaps the clearest example. For decades, officials insisted recovered debris came from a weather balloon. Only in the 1990s did the government publicly reveal the connection to Project Mogul, the classified balloon program designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. The revised explanation was historically accurate, yet many citizens interpreted it differently. If the original story had been incomplete, perhaps later explanations were incomplete as well. The cycle of suspicion continued. Popular culture eagerly amplified these doubts. Television documentaries revisited famous cases. Books claimed hidden evidence. Talk shows featured eyewitnesses and investigators. Eventually, fictional series such as The X-Files transformed government secrecy into one of television's defining themes. Millions of viewers absorbed the idea that somewhere inside anonymous government offices, officials quietly concealed astonishing truths. Reality and entertainment increasingly overlapped. Project Blue Book itself became part of American folklore. Yet history often proves more complicated than myth. Blue Book was neither an all-knowing organization hiding every answer, nor a meaningless public relations exercise explaining everything away. It was something far more human, a small group of investigators operating under difficult political, scientific, and military constraints. They solved many mysteries. They failed to solve others. They worked within a government shaped by Cold War secrecy, limited resources, and competing priorities. Perhaps their greatest legacy was not the answers they found. It was the questions they left behind. Because the story did not actually end in 1969. For decades afterward, military pilots continued reporting unusual encounters. Advanced radar systems detected unfamiliar objects. New technologies created new mysteries. The names changed, the aircraft changed, the sensors improved. But one question remained remarkably consistent. What should a government do when trained observers repeatedly report objects they cannot identify? Nearly 50 years after Project Blue Book closed its doors, that question would return to the center of American politics in a way almost no one expected. The investigation had ended. The mystery had not. On December 17, 1969, Project Blue Book officially came to an end. The office closed. The investigators moved on. The filing cabinets were emptied. Thousands of reports found their way into government archives. To many officials, it marked the conclusion of a long and sometimes frustrating chapter in American history. The Air Force believed it had answered the questions it had been asked. There was no evidence that UFOs represented a threat to national security, no confirmed proof of technology beyond human scientific knowledge, no verified evidence that Earth had been visited by extraterrestrial spacecraft. Case closed. But history has a curious way of refusing to stay inside closed files. For decades after Blue Book ended, reports never stopped. Commercial pilots continued describing unusual objects. Military aviators occasionally encountered things they could not immediately identify. Astronomers observed rare atmospheric phenomena. New technologies produced unfamiliar visual effects. Satellites multiplied in Earth's orbit. Experimental drones entered the skies. Every generation inherited a different version of the same mystery. Only now, the mystery looked slightly different. The question was no longer simply, are flying saucers real? Instead, it became something much broader. How should governments investigate things they genuinely cannot identify? That may sound like a small change. In reality, it transformed the entire conversation. By the 21st century, advances in technology had dramatically improved our ability to observe the sky. Military aircraft carried sophisticated infrared cameras. Radar systems became vastly more powerful than anything available during Blue Book's era. Satellites watched nearly every corner of Earth. Commercial airliners flew with advanced navigation equipment. Millions of people carried smartphones capable of recording high-definition video. At first glance, it seemed logical that better technology would finally solve the mystery. Instead, something unexpected happened. The number of observations increased. Most gained ordinary explanations. Weather balloons, commercial drones, rocket launches, optical effects, camera artifacts, foreign surveillance technology. But once again, a small number resisted immediate identification. Notice the wording, not extraterrestrial, not alien, simply unidentified. The same careful language that J. Allen Hynek had insisted upon decades earlier returned to public discussion. Governments around the world gradually adopted a new term. Instead of UFO, many officials began using unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP. The change reflected an important lesson learned from Project Blue Book. The phrase flying saucer carried decades of cultural baggage. It immediately suggested a particular shape, a particular explanation, a particular image borrowed from movies and television. Unidentified aerial phenomenon described only what investigators actually knew. Something had been observed. Its identity remained uncertain. Nothing more, nothing less. Language matters. Blue Book had taught that lesson long ago. Another remarkable change occurred. For many years, military pilots hesitated to report unusual encounters. Some feared ridicule. Others worried such reports might damage their careers. That concern had existed during Blue Book. It continued long afterward. Imagine spending years earning a reputation as a disciplined naval aviator or Air Force pilot. Would you willingly risk that reputation by describing something difficult to explain? Many remained silent. As a result, valuable observations may never have reached investigators at all. Modern military organizations increasingly recognized this problem. Regardless of what unidentified objects ultimately prove to be, pilots need a professional way to report potential hazards. An unidentified object does not have to be extraterrestrial to present a safety concern. It might represent a drone, a foreign surveillance platform, an equipment malfunction, an atmospheric phenomenon, or simply another aircraft in an unexpected location. Every possibility deserves attention. In that sense, one of Project Blue Book's original purposes remains just as relevant today as it was in 1952. Protecting airspace requires investigating the unknown. Another lesson from Blue Book has become even more important with the arrival of the Internet. Information now spreads around the world in minutes. A single blurry video posted online can reach millions of viewers before experts have an opportunity to examine it. Artificial intelligence can generate convincing images. Digital editing software allows almost anyone to create realistic visual effects. Ironically, today's challenge is often the opposite of Blue Books. During the 1950s, investigators struggled because evidence was scarce. Today, investigators struggle because evidence is overwhelming. Thousands of videos appear online every week. Most lack essential context. Where were they recorded? When? Using what equipment? Has the footage been edited? Without reliable information, even authentic recordings become difficult to evaluate. Blue Book's emphasis on careful documentation suddenly feels remarkably modern. Investigators still ask many of the same questions. Who observed it? How many witnesses were present? What were the weather conditions? Did radar detect anything? Can independent evidence confirm the event? Technology changes. Good investigative methods endure. Project Blue Book also left behind another, more subtle legacy. It demonstrated the importance of intellectual humility. That phrase rarely appears in dramatic documentaries. Yet, it may be the project's greatest lesson. Throughout its history, Blue Book attracted two opposite forms of certainty. Some people believed every unidentified object must represent extraterrestrial visitors. Others insisted every report had an ordinary explanation. Reality proved less satisfying. Some cases were solved immediately. Others remained unresolved. Uncertainty became unavoidable. Science advances by reducing uncertainty, not pretending it never exists. Allen Hynek gradually came to appreciate this truth. So did many investigators who spent years examining difficult cases. Admitting we don't know is not weakness. It is often the beginning of genuine understanding. Project Blue Book also reminds us how profoundly history shapes perception. Consider the world of 1952. The Cold War dominated politics. Nuclear war seemed possible. Secret aircraft crossed the skies. Radar technology was still relatively new. Television was transforming communication. Against that backdrop, flying saucer reports carried meanings that extended far beyond mysterious lights. They reflected fear, hope, technological change, government secrecy, national identity. Now compare that world with today. Drones regularly fly above cities. Private companies launch rockets every week. Artificial intelligence generates realistic videos. Spacecraft from multiple nations explore the Moon and Mars. Commercial satellites blanket Earth's orbit. The unknown has changed. But humanity's response remains surprisingly familiar. We still look upward. We still wonder. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Project Blue Book is that it was never really about aliens. It was about uncertainty. How does a democratic society respond when confronted with incomplete information? How much secrecy is justified during times of national danger? How should scientists investigate unpopular subjects? How do journalists balance curiosity with responsibility? How do ordinary people distinguish between evidence, rumor, and imagination? These questions reach far beyond UFOs. They appear throughout history, during pandemics, during wars, during technological revolutions. Whenever societies encounter the unknown, the same challenges emerge. Evidence competes with speculation. Facts compete with fear. Trust becomes as important as information itself. Blue Book became a case study in all of these problems. Looking back after more than half a century, it is tempting to judge the investigators harshly. Why didn't they solve every mystery? Why weren't all classified programs revealed? Why were some explanations later revised? But history is rarely so simple. Most people working on Project Blue Book were attempting to answer difficult questions with limited information. They operated inside the political realities of the Cold War. They balanced scientific uncertainty against military secrecy. They made mistakes. They also produced one of the most comprehensive collections of aerial observations ever assembled. Perhaps that is why historians continue studying Blue Book today. Not because it proved alien visitation, not because it disproved every extraordinary claim, but because it captured a unique moment when America confronted the unknown at the height of the Cold War. Its files preserve more than mysterious sightings. They preserve human reactions to uncertainty. And those reactions remain timeless. In recent years, many of Blue Book's original case files have become available to researchers through the National Archives. Historians continue examining them. Scientists revisit older investigations using modern techniques. Skeptics test conventional explanations. Supporters search for overlooked patterns. The conversation continues because history itself continues. Every generation asks new questions of old evidence. That process is healthy. History is not a collection of fixed answers. It is an ongoing investigation. Perhaps that is the most appropriate way to remember Project Blue Book. Not as a secret warehouse hiding crashed spacecraft, not as a flawless scientific institution, but as a remarkably human effort to understand extraordinary reports during one of the most anxious periods in American history. Some mysteries yielded to careful investigation. Others dissolved as secret technologies became public. A handful remain unresolved, not necessarily because they conceal impossible truths, but because evidence has limits. Every investigation eventually reaches a point where certainty can go no further. There is one final irony. Project Blue Book was created because the government feared unidentified objects might threaten the United States. Instead, its lasting importance lies somewhere entirely different. It taught us that the greatest challenge is often not the object in the sky. It is how we respond to uncertainty here on the ground. Do we leap to conclusions? Do we dismiss uncomfortable questions? Or do we remain patient enough to let evidence guide us, even when the answer is incomplete? That choice belongs not only to governments or scientists. It belongs to all of us. The next time you look up into a clear night sky, you may see a satellite quietly crossing overhead. You may spot the International Space Station reflecting sunlight. You may watch a meteor flash across the atmosphere. Or perhaps you'll notice something that you cannot immediately explain. If that happens, you'll be sharing an experience with thousands of Americans whose reports filled the files of Project Blue Book decades ago. Most eventually discovered ordinary answers. Some never did. Either way, the impulse is the same: to observe, to question, to investigate. Because curiosity has always been one of humanity's greatest strengths, long before Project Blue Book, long after it ended, and long into the future as new generations continue looking toward the skies and asking the oldest question of all: what exactly are we seeing?